All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, first of all, or afternoon, depending on where you are. And welcome to our conference, Mental Health in the Climate Crisis. My name is Dr. Jacqueline Burrell, and I am a naturopathic doctor and also a recent graduate of Shakespeare University. I will be your MC for this event, and it is truly my privilege and pleasure on behalf of all of our organizers and sponsors to welcome you here today. There is a closed capturing feature that you'll have to turn on yourselves if you'd like, and it's located at the bottom of the bar of Zoom near participants, chats, reactions. So right below if I'm pointing. So briefly, anxiety, depression, PTSD, and suicidality continue to increase as temperatures rise and more people experience extreme weather events. According to research, for every person affected by a climate disaster, there are 40 people affected mentally and emotionally. And this is disproportionately affecting young people, elders, marginalized BIPOC communities who are not only vulnerable to climate impacts, but we're also disproportionately affected by many other health issues, as I'm sure many of us are aware about. And the good thing is, though, that these communities have very special expertise and practices for resilience. And so part of our hope for this event is that you can take away some of these amazing practices and tools to put into your resiliency toolkit. So again, it is so wonderful to see so many of you here today, and I would like to extend a gracious and inclusive welcome to all of you. So I invite you to learn with us about the history, current state, and future of mental health in the climate crisis. We also have some Health in the Climate Crisis program resources, and these can be found on the Health in the Climate Crisis program Canvas page. And so you should have two links on how to access Canvas. It's free and your data won't be shared. You enroll through that link. And once you're enrolled, you can access the Health in the Climate Crisis info events and resources. And there's a second link that leads you to those resources. And just put a little pin on that and come back to it as you wish. So moving forward, please turn off your cameras as much as I'd love to see all of your faces, and mute yourselves just for now so we can keep the spotlight on our panelists. Later on, we will move into breakout rooms to have a nice rich discussion where we can communicate freely and openly with each other. And then we can, build that connection, that community while having our cameras back on and speaking. So again, my name is Dr. Burrell, and welcome to this event. We're so excited to have you here. Next, I would like to introduce you Jackie Julian, Director of Communities of Color Coalition, C3, who will be giving a land acknowledgement and labor acknowledgement, followed by spoken gratitude by Dr. Kathleen Lumiere.
Hi, good morning, and thank you, Jacqueline. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral homelands, on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, who have lived the Salish Sea basin since time immemorial. We respect the place and honor the sacred spiritual connection to the land, the water, and its people, past, present, and future. By acknowledging these lands and their original indigenous inhabitants, we reach back to our own indigeneity and reflect on the impacts of colonialism and the lands from which our people come. We are connected to our ancestors through this connection to the land. For it is the land that connects us all. Please join us in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude to the traditional peoples of the territory you currently occupy. It is essential to acknowledge that this country would not exist if it weren't for the free enslaved labor of Black people and the contributions of the Chinese railroad workers in helping complete the most important construction project, mid-19th century America. We honor the legacy of the African, Asian, and Native diaspora and acknowledge the skills given to the people of the country we live in today. We must also acknowledge whose lands who have been taken through the colonization deceits of the US to that end. We must honor history by continuing to interrogate it. This acknowledgement is an act of consciousness to remember our past from the colonies to the Confederate States to the United States, hoping that we may work together towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Really hits. We'll next have some spoken gratitude by our co-organizer, Dr. Kathleen Lumiere.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for that. Yeah. Mental health is a gripping topic, which affects all of us at some point in our lives, and lately, almost everyone. It's also somewhat mysterious and can be frightening. So we're fortunate to have the perspective, guidance, and wisdom of our panelists here today. Deep, deep thanks to them for being here and for sharing their knowledge and their experience. Thanks to the leadership of the Communities of Color Coalition and Bastyr University for showing their belief in the value of this community academic partnership to address the health effects of climate change by providing honorariums to our speakers and outreach support so that participation in this event could be free. Thanks to wonderful colleagues and co-organizers, especially Daniel Van Arsdale, Dr. Danielle Ung, Dr. Jerry Ibalaraza-Tunnell, Megan Slade, Jonas Placidas, Dr. Lev Elson-Schwab, and Ben Young, and Jackie Julian. Also, thanks to Andrew Bryant for providing us a great model to integrate what we learned today with what we already know in our hearts, minds, and communities. Gratitude, as mentioned before, has its roots in the earth. This season of renewal, spring, and growth, may it bring new life to us all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Springtime, it's a time to really see those changes, feel the dirt, feel those sprouts come up from the ground, the buds come from the trees, and bring the sense of hope, I think. And I think we'll all leave today with a bit more hope. So leading us into, we will be having a panel discussion today to explore these themes of mental health in the context of climate change. I will introduce our wonderful panelists, beginning with Dr. Danielle Ung. And so Dr. Danielle Ung is an assistant professor and licensed clinical psychologist at Bastyr University in the Department of Counseling and Health Psychology, teaching both undergraduate and graduate students. She is the primary advisor for the Alana Mentorship Group at Bastyr. Dr. Ung specializes in working with children and their families in the areas of autism, anxiety, depression, and ADHD, and has over 10 years of experience working with youth from marginalized communities. Joining her, we have Jonas Placidas. So Jonas works for the nonprofit Crisis Connections, where he manages the volunteers from multiple local 24-hour crisis lines. These crisis lines provide anonymous, free emotional support, as well as connections to critical resources for those in crisis. Calls to crisis lines have only continued to increase since the inception of the pandemic, representing an important avenue for individuals to access immediate help. Whether that simply be a need for empathy or a need for more serious intervention. Jonas's background is in sociology, and he believes in the importance of critically examining the past and present of institutionalized discrimination and inequality as a means of contemplating a better future. Next panelist we have is Megan Slade. Megan Slade is a licensed mental health counselor with a focus on perinatal mental health, trauma, and climate distress. She is a co-founder of Talk Climate, a community resource hub centering climate conversations that invest in the character, mindset, and empowerment of young people. She works in community with the Beacon Hill Council Environmental Justice Task Force to address air and noise pollution from aircraft and operations at SeaTac Airport. And we have Deborah Parker, also known by her native name, Sitsayaltsa. So Deborah is an activist and Indigenous leader in the United States. She is a co-founder of Indigenous Women Rise and board member of the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. A member of the Tulalip Tribes of Washington, she served as its vice chairwoman from 2012 to 2015 and is a board member of For Our Revolution and the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. She is also a co-founder of Indigenous Women Rise and CEO of National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. During the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2013, Parker successfully campaigned both for the reauthorization and for the inclusion of provisions which gave tribal courts jurisdiction over violent crimes against women and families involving non-Native Americans on tribal lands. She also served in the 2016 Democratic National Convention as one of the platform committee members representing Bernie Sanders, where she helped to ensure that Native policy initiatives were ultimately rolled into the party's larger platform. And I will also introduce our moderator, Dr. Jerry Abalarosa Tanal, who will ask these questions, which will be on a link that you have in the agenda. So Dr. Jerry is the founder and the principal consultant of CO3 Consulting, Co-Creating Cohesive Communities. Dr. G earned a doctorate from the Department of Transformative Studies and Consciousness at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She received her master's degree from Antioch University in Seattle in whole systems design and a social science major with an emphasis in psychology and anthropology from Washington State University. Dr. G identifies as a Pacific Indigenous scholar, a transformative leader, and a designer of change. Born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, now residing in Bothell, Washington, she has learned how to walk in the two worlds of Indigenous being and Westernized thought with grace and aloha. A certified trainer of the Institute of HeartMath Resilience Advantage Program, Jerry teaches the power of resilience alongside co-creating change. Dr. G leans into the direct impact through learning and growing together, founded in the evolution of aloha. And now we will have the panelists begin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Burrell. So some formalities to go over before we get started is the panelists will be answering questions addressing factors from the past, issues in the present, and how we move forward for a better future. They each will have about 3 minutes to answer. And as they're answering the questions, I'm going to ask the audience to follow Andrew Bryant's 4-step process of taking action to address injustice from your own heart, with awareness of your own feelings and finding a sense of meaning and agency in your life. So feel, talk, unite, and act. And also take notice of what's happening in your body when engaging by following the guiding principles of aloha, which is ask, listen, observe, heart work, and adapt and acknowledge. So if questions come up for you as you listen to the panelists, please write them down in the chat, and we will have time in the end for questions and answers and the opportunity to participate in deeper conversations throughout the breakout sessions. I also feel it's important to let you know, as I moderate this discussion, focusing on the impact of climate change on the mental health of vulnerable communities. I need to let you know that the foundation I will moderating from will be coming from a decolonial lens. And as an Indigenous scholar, I believe that decolonization is returning to nature. It is reacquainting ourselves with what it means to be part of Earth's ecosystem. Colonialism is predicated on stripping us of that connection. So decolonization means restoring respect for our natural environment and those around us. And as Adrienne Maree Brown writes in Emergent Strategy, we are all invited to reach out to one another as the individually powerful parts that we are, and to make an even more powerful whole. So climate change threatens everyone's physical health, mental health, air, water, food, and shelter. But some socially and economically disadvantaged groups face the most significant risks. And this is because of where they live, their health, income, language barriers, and limited access to resources. In the US, these more vulnerable communities are largely communities of color, immigrants, low-income communities, and people for whom English is not their native language. These individuals will suffer the worst impacts of climate change as time goes on, unless we recognize together that fighting climate change and environmental justice are inextricably linked. And so now I'm going to be asking the panelists the first question. The first question is, what are the historical factors and root causes that disproportionately place marginalized BIPOC communities at a higher risk and exacerbate the impact of climate change? And we're going to start with Dr. Danielle Ang.
Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Dr. Jerry, for starting with that introduction. I think it's very, very important that, that we cannot talk about the climate change impacts on marginalized BIPOC communities without actually talking about some of those factors that Dr. Jerry's spoken of. We can't talk about it without talking about structural racism. We can't talk about it without talking about colonization, systematic oppression, and the collective and historical trauma. For example, the discriminatory housing restrictions, the redlining, racist polluting, both in the past and in the future, in the current present that we're experiencing, that place our marginalized BIPOC communities at a higher risk to have a greater impact of climate change here. We know that systematic oppression that denies financial and political resources to these communities make it harder for them to recover from the impact of climate change, right? Starting in, even in early history and what we see even now here to the present, examples of discriminatory housing restrictions have placed a lot of marginalized BIPOC communities in living conditions that are high risks, that are on high risk, but also are places that, and in fact, they experience unhealthy living conditions. Areas that have few trees, few parks, polluted air and water, that we know absolutely increases the risk for them to experience the impact of climate change and the mental health impacts as well. It is not a coincidence, okay, that industries that promote pollution, that actually, that contribute to the highest carbon emissions are placed in places where there are higher numbers and greater numbers of marginalized BIPOC communities, right? We know that the top 10% of those individuals or communities that produce the most carbon emissions are in fact the ones that are less likely to experience the impact of carbon emissions, leaving many marginalized BIPOC communities having to suffer for that. So I could go on for longer length about this, but I want to just share the space here, and thank you so much for allowing me the space to answer this question.
Thank you, Dr. Ang. Deb Parker.
Well, Halchdatitude, Sitsayaltsa Sitstad, my traditional name. I'm here in Tulalip, and as I sit in amongst the cedar trees, I think about the deep connection that we've had, and many of us still have today, with the land. And once you now drive away because you can no longer walk down the road because of the freeway being the roads, there's no sidewalk. We're forced to have an alternate life than what our teachings tell us to do, which is to leave the earth in a good place and don't take more than you need. And at this time, because of colonization and the acts such as the Indian Civil Acts Fund that in 1819 and the Peace Policy of 1869, the United States came and took many of our lands and put our children in boarding schools and took us away from our natural elements, how we were able to just feed from the land and give back. And we always knew how much to take and when to take it. And we always knew that if we were injured, we could just go to, I can go back outside here to my grass, and there's Indian Band-Aids, there's medicines that are in my yard and all around my home. And so when our kids were taken to the boarding school, we think about 80%, as we do our research, we're looking at 80% of, over 80% of Indigenous children were taken to the boarding schools, and they were no longer taught this holistic Indigenous way of life. We were forcibly taken from our families, and many of the children never returned home. So that impact on how we've learned about our traditional way of life and respecting the earth was removed from us. Many of our elders held on to that, and they continue to try and teach us about protection of the earth and who we are as Indigenous peoples, but it's been a lot of work. It's been a ton of soul searching, and much of the time, Indigenous peoples are criticized for our belief systems, and now modern day scientists are finding that yes, the trees have vibrations, and yes, we can, as many of you know here, we can go to the earth and find what we need. We don't have to have major extraction. It can be a peaceful connection to the earth. And so that's that history of colonization. And I know it's a short time to share just a little bit, but this is the impact within myself and my own home being here in Tulalip. And I know for other Indigenous peoples, getting back to that center, getting back to a holistic way of life is a goal for so many of us.
Thank you so much, Deb. Megan.
Thank you. I am so grateful and humbled to be in this space, especially as a white woman who's continuing to benefit from white privilege. I deeply believe that we as white people hold a significant responsibility to address the climate crisis and be certain that we're following the leadership of our BIPOC communities. I really have Jamie Margolin, who's a youth climate activist and co-founder of Zero Hour, to thank for opening my eyes up to the root causes of the climate crisis: colonialism, capitalism, racism, and patriarchy, all systems of white supremacy culture, and are behind the factors that Danielle rightfully spoke to of redlining, the urban heat island effect, sacrifice zones, and generational theft. And I think that the reality that our zip code is the greatest predictor of our health really sums that up for us. I also really thank Jeremy Williams for his recent book, Climate Change is Racist, that really defines that it is structurally racist, that it's predominantly caused by white people, communities, and countries, and that those who are least responsible, especially in the global South and in BIPOC communities here in the US, are the ones who are bearing the brunt. So to put this into framework, the world's richest 0.54% emit more greenhouse gas emissions than the poorest half of the global population. And I think it's just really worth noting and pausing with that. And for me, when I start to think about climate change as the as a physical manifestation of human systems of racial and colonial oppression, that opens up this opportunity for us to identify these oppressive feedback loops, start to interrupt them. And my hope is that when we talk about feedback loops, these are the ones that we pay attention to, and these are the ones that we can take action on. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Jonas, did you want to add anything to that?
Hi again, everyone. Thank you for having me in this space. I would like to, of course, acknowledge my own privilege in this discussion, and also that I have been insulated from a lot of the historical and contemporary effects that we are talking about. Nonetheless, I just want to reemphasize one of the underlying points from Danielle, which is that we are dealing with a legacy of structural decisions that have been made by those in power. Of course, we're talking about white people And to recognize that particularly in the city of Seattle, we saw a near perfection of racial covenants, of geographic zoning of specific populations, and we're dealing with that legacy today as we see certain racial groups pushed either to the south or the east, and white people residing predominantly in the north, where the resources that many people need to thrive and succeed are located. And so I just wanted to reemphasize those structural considerations.
Thank you, Jonas. I just want to pause really quick that as the panelists are speaking, there are some things that may come up for you. Again, please pay attention to what is in your body, what is coming up for you, write them down, process that, and we'll talk about it later. What I don't want is for cognitive dissonance to set in where you will stop listening. So there are a lot of things that's going to be coming up. Your autonomic nervous system is going to be activated at this moment. Be aware of it, come back to your breath, breathe through it all as we continue. So the next question, thank you so much, panelists, for such the in-depth information that you shared. Given the information that you have shared, how do these factors place marginalized BIPOC communities at a higher risk of developing mental health issues due to climate change? And we'll go back around and we'll start off with Dr. Daniel Ang.
Thank you, Jerry. So, some of the things that I had mentioned earlier on with some of the historical and root causes that have placed, that disproportionately have placed marginalized communities at a higher risk, including that structural racism, colonization, and systematic oppression. If you combine that with our marginalized BIPOC communities being exposed to pollution and unhealthy living conditions, with the additional stressors of racism, violence, inequality, mental health disparities, right? And a lack of resources, right, to address these things, right? And we see this both in the past and the present. And the generational trauma that lives in the bodies of our marginalized BIPOC communities, right? You can see how this can lead to a higher risk of mental health impact. We know that research has shown us that higher inequality is linked to more susceptibility to the effects of climate change. We know that climate change absolutely exacerbates the social determinants of mental health, especially in these communities. Their jobs, their housing, their access to health services, right, and providers that impact our abilities to cope during these times. Right? When there is a climate change disaster, right, we ask ourselves, who are the ones that are able to move, go to different places, right, have the resources to build their lives up again, and have the political and structural support to do so. And a lot of times it is not our marginalized BIPOC communities, right, due to some of those factors that I had mentioned earlier. So again, trying to wrap up is that there are a lot of different factors that are stacked up against our marginalized BIPOC communities, I think by design, that make it more difficult to cope with the physical impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ang. Deb Parker.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I think as we look at the broader picture of, Indigenous peoples and the account for, for the most of the world's cultural diversity, throughout the world, there's approximately 370 million Indigenous people occupying 20% of the Earth's territory. It's also estimated that they represent as many as 5,000 different Indigenous cultures. And I know that number's much higher. The Indigenous people of the world, therefore, account for most of the world's cultural diversity, even though they constitute a numerical minority. So why is that important? Well, the teachings of the lands that go historically back to, as was stated a little bit earlier, since time immemorial. So these teachings are very much rooted in how we care for the earth. So our role is as Indigenous people, and we are birthed into this world knowing that we are caretakers. Goes back to the connection of our mother, the connection of the land, of the four-legged, or the winged. So as we go outside, each piece of rooted vegetation, each flower reminds us of our lands, the seasons, how we are to behave. They all have a significance in our teachings, and without the Indigenous peoples and the contribution and understanding of the earth and the land, I believe we're suffering so greatly. And it is important to go back to those deep-rooted connections that understand every hill, every site, a lot of our names, a lot of our traditional names go back from these places. My name Sitsailtso goes back to to the island here on the Camino Head and our longhouses. So we know these teachings, and it's so important to go back to those teachings, to go back to why it's important to protect our lands. Even where Indigenous peoples currently have legal deeds to their lands, these lands are often leased out by the state as mining or logging concessions without consultation of Indigenous peoples, let alone their free and prior informed consent, which is critically important anywhere we go on any lands. The lack of legal security of tenure remains a crucial issue for Indigenous peoples almost everywhere. But again, it's that canary, also the canary in the mine. So we see that, we're taught there's such an innate sense of belonging and self here. And the more we connect to not only our spiritual light within us, but we also connect to the light and energy within the trees, the mountains, the waterways. That's our whole being here on earth. And when that's removed, it's another killing of our soul. It's another taking from the people and from the earth. We know we are one, we're connected in that way. And we need the earth needs us. We're protectors, and that's our goal, that's our role.
Thank you so much, Deb. Megan?
Thank you. I'm just really resonating with this place of being caretakers and coming back to, our zip codes, that we have not been good caretakers of one another. And this continues with climate gentrification, with ecofascism, where we are placing those who are most vulnerable closest to the rising seas, to our degraded land and air and water, to the extreme weather events. All of these increase our risk for mental health conditions and symptoms. And it's estimated that half of the health impacts of climate change are going to be mental health. So it's right that we're paying attention here in this moment to this reality. The people that I really feel concerned for is our young people who are most affected. Their child born today is going to be affected at every stage of development throughout their life. And our young people, in a recent Pew poll, it is their number one concern. And from a Lancet study last year, it is a global concern across all areas of the globe. And then, of course, as we've said, it is going to be our BIPOC youth who are most affected. So I just think that this is a moment where, starting from conception all throughout the lifespan, that we really take this moment to move into being caretakers of one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Jonas, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I've been quite struck by thinking about what it would be like to have certain basic rights and resources be an uncertainty. And I in preparation for this event, was doing some reading, and I know that there is this burgeoning concept of climate grief, that we can indeed grieve the destruction of the environment that exists around us. And interestingly enough, what we see in examining the past is that that grief around climate and the uncertainty around our living conditions, the resources that we have, has been an ever-present condition for marginalized communities. And we are now just starting to experience that on a universal and broader level. And I think that it's important for those of privilege to contemplate what that means, that the past, that the present that we're experiencing has been a vivid experience that has already been happening for those communities who don't have control over where they exist or the conditions that they live in.
Thank you, Jonas. So climate change and related disasters cause anxiety-related responses, as well as chronic and severe mental health disorders. Flooding and prolonged droughts have been associated with elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders. The trauma and losses from a disaster, such as losing a home or job, being torn away from your sacred lands and disconnected from the neighborhood and community, can contribute to depression and anxiety. And as if you heard from the panelists, the feedback loops that exist needs to be interrogated. When Indigenous people, when people are removed from their sacred lands, from their medicine, this is done by design. As Dr. Ung mentioned, this is done by design. So we need to stop looking at the fact that the system is broken. The system is not broken. The system is designed to do exactly what the system was built to do. What is important is for us to dismantle the system and create a new system to make the old system obsolete. So the next question that I have for the panelists is, how is climate change currently affecting the mental health of marginalized BIPOC communities? And what is being done or not being done to address this issue? Dr. Danielle Ung?
Yes, thank you, Jerry. So I will speak from my experience of working with our young marginalized BIPOC communities. And I will tell you, in addition to the things that Megan had said, is that in my work with them, you know, young people are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change for the reasons, again, that Megan mentioned. Their nervous systems are still developing. Their emotion regulation skills are still developing. They're often dependent upon their caregivers, looking to those caregivers to have answers for them and how to cope with what they're seeing around them. For a marginalized BIPOC community, it's not only climate change, but it's the racism, the discrimination, the microaggressions that they have to deal with on a daily basis that often makes a lot of the clients that I work with ask themselves, is there a future for me? The future is frightening. What will be left of the earth for me, right? Many of them feeling that the planet is doomed, or even hesitant to have children because they're asking themselves, what kind of world am I bringing my child into, right? And so, so many, by experiencing some of the physical impacts of climate change, and which can be extremely traumatic, can lead to many losses, including, you know, homes, pets, family members, things that are consistent in their lives, right? These things can cause incredible amount of distress and anxiety. And as we mentioned, as Dr. Jerry mentioned, PTSD symptoms and depression. And the thing about their responses, though, is that climate anxiety, the anxiety about climate change and the social injustices that are occurring, is actually a rational response to a real threat that is happening presently today, right? And so Well, and we'll later talk about this, what we can do about this. But what I think is not being done right now is that we are not listening to the voice, and we're not taking seriously the voices of our young, marginalized BIPOC communities. I think they need to be included as part of the solution and empowered to do so. So thank you, Dr. Jerry.
Thank you, Danielle. Deb?
This is a great question, Dr. G. I think that we need to have more of these discussions about what we're, how climate change is currently impacting us, and what can we do, and what can we undo. And so I look at the public school systems. We just about 4 days ago released some turtles to help them go back into the waters in Mexico, southern Mexico. And I was with my son, and we were assisting the little turtles going back into the water. And then later, an indigenous person from that area said, well, that's nice that they have that program, but when the turtles hatch, they need to go right into the water, not wait for a while. They lose their, once they hatch, they lose their, the whole struggle to go down into the water. They have the energy, but by the time maybe we get there in the late afternoon, the baby turtles, sea turtles, are tired already. So sometimes we think we're helping, and maybe it's helping to an extent, but if we go back to our natural GPS, our natural systems, I think it's going to be incredibly magical for all of us. I look at the baby, my own child, my own son, who's 12 years old, and we didn't put him into kindergarten. I just felt it was too soon. And going into a school, sitting in a classroom for hours, and then lining up from one area to the next, I just didn't feel comfortable about that. And it's just, I had to go back into my own spiritual self and systems within myself as a mother, and having two older children, sending them to school and seeing all the things that they missed out of our cultural ways because I sent them to a public education system. I decided to do something different with my younger son, and his system is much more calm. He he's more rooted in the seasons. I homeschool him. He just has this, he doesn't feel like he has to compete with anyone. He just naturally leans into the day. When you're hungry, you're hungry. When you want to go outside and connect, you do. He listens to his body and his system much more than I know that's the students. When I worked in the public school system, I was just worried because they're not connecting to the earth. They're not, a lot of our kids are not going outside. They're not feeling the vibrations and the energy that helps to maintain their neurological systems, even the social systems, because I believe we find our strength outside. We find our strength in the rivers and the mountains. We find our strength near the water, and our kids are missing out on that. If they don't know where their food comes from, then how are they to understand how to continue feeding themselves? So the scarcity is really impacting our mental wellness. And for us, if it's as Indigenous peoples, it's our identity, and we're taking that away from our kids, then we're doing something wrong. And how do we undo that? We put our kids back into the environment, not sterilized classrooms. We put them back into the environment, and we allow our kids to touch the earth and to notice what's outside, whether it's looking up in the sky or looking down to see how the earth is rotating and moving. So that would be my big, let's start out right. Let's reprogram, because our kids are so incredibly worried and they're graduating without the skill set, without the knowledge and understanding of the simple knowledge and understanding of how the earth, how it works, how we connect to the earth. So I think we're doing a great injustice to our children.
Thank you, Deb. Megan.
Yeah, thank you. Having a 7-year-old in the school system, I yearn for what you're offering. I also really thought about our education system, and in talking with young people, it's more often BIPOC young people who say, I didn't learn about this in school. I stumbled upon it like somewhere later on in my education. And it really was worrisome for me to go all that time not knowing about it. So I think that we need to make sure that we have access for all young people to have not climate education, but climate justice education, where they learn about these root causes, and then we open up that space to disrupt these systems. And I think that is happening here in Washington State, but it's slow and it needs to move faster. There's a survey that came out of Yale Climate Communication that demonstrated that BIPOC people are more concerned about climate than their white counterparts, and they're more likely to take climate action. So it's really a call for those of us with privilege to really step up and step into addressing the issue. And I think, as Danielle spoke to, there is this psychological or synergistic toll of being on the front lines of EJ, of experiencing climate change, and then being on all the forms of racial trauma that are being experienced. I think there's some really good things that are happening here in Seattle. We have the Green New Deal, and really that's being focused on putting those resources into the communities that are experiencing the bulk of the pollution, helping to do the adaptations that are needed. And the one that I love the most, we just signed into law Doulas for All. So now people who are on Medicaid can get a doula paid for. And when we have these huge birth disparities where women of color are 4 to 5 times more likely to die in childbirth, this to me is like a great climate action, and grateful that that's happening.
Thank you, Megan. Jonas.
I do not have anything to add for this question.
Thank you, Jonas. We're going to go right into the final question for the panelists. And this is, what can we do to mitigate these effects as healthcare providers, community members, people with power and privilege? And how can we support our marginalized communities? Danielle?
Thank you, Dr. Jerry. So it is my belief that social justice and climate change is one and the same. That you can't address the impacts of climate change, right, without actually also addressing the root causes and actually engaging in social justice work. I think it's so incredibly important that we give a voice to our marginalized BIPOC communities. We ask them what are their wants, their needs, how we can best to support them. Because for so long have marginalized BIPOC communities been told what has been best for them. What do they need? And has been done to them rather than with them. And so I think one of the things that absolutely can move us in the right direction is actually collaboration with these communities and meeting those needs. I will also speak to the youth that I work with. When I work with them, the goal is not to remove these negative feelings, right? I want them to embrace all the feelings that they have about it. And at the same time, I also want them to be able to tolerate those negative feelings, understand, validate what those feelings are telling them, right? And help to remove some of the barriers that get in the way of them being able to process, regulate, and move forward with those emotions, right? Again, climate action and climate justice awareness are so incredibly important components to addressing what needs to be done to help our marginalized BIPOC communities, right? To support our BIPOC communities. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dr. Ang. Deb Parker, I know that you mentioned some of these things on how to mitigate these effects, but you want to add a little bit more on how can we support our marginalized communities?
Absolutely. As far as policy and law, it is critically important that we engage in the political system to ensure that voices are heard, that we get out and vote and support people who are conscious of the vibrations of the earth and what needs to be done to protect our waterways. Our water, if we don't have water, we don't have life. As many know, that when you say Mini Wachoni, water is life, it really is. It really connects us to not only sustains us through drinking of the water, but also our plants and our animal life. It all connects to us, and if we don't understand that connection, then we cease to exist. We will cease to exist. And our elders have told us this, have said the importance of not polluting the waters and taking care of the earth, it's our veins, that's part of our connection. And it's so important that we not only look at the teachings of today, but that extends it into the future, 7 generations and beyond. So we right now, this culture and the way we live, it's so much of consumption that we forget that we need to provide for tomorrow. As proper caretakers, we need to provide for our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren. So there's simple teachings that we are forgetting and that we have, we're disconnecting. So taking our children back to the children, taking our children back to the earth, taking them back to understand how to care for the earth and how to care for one another. We have to, it goes back to simple teachings. We have to love one another, pay attention, listen. Jonas had said, he said, I didn't have anything to say. And I thought, what? Honestly, it was beautiful. And I honor you for that, for just, sometimes it is good to listen and be respectful. And I think we need to learn to open up that space for people who think differently and feel differently. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks, Deb. Megan.
I think what we're doing today, that we're talking about this, and most importantly, that we're centering the voices of those who are most impacted, and that we really commit to this care and repair approach. Again, coming back to centering those people and especially those places that have been most harmed. A lot of the work that I do with Talk Climate is really about helping young people start to envision and work towards that more healthy, equitable, just world that we're all dreaming and preparing to birth, and really not from that doomerism that feeds into the oppressive forces, but this place of envisioning and dreaming. And I think, more from the psychological lens, we have this budding field of climate aware therapy, and it really has this opportunity to be decolonized, to decentralize the way that we deliver healthcare. There is no way that the mental health care system is going to be able to address all of these impacts. We need to bring it back to community, and we need to invest there. I think that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you, Megan. Jonas.
Well, I think that we've talked a lot today about some huge historical and institutional issues, and those are things that won't be resolved overnight. And I think that it's important to say, and I'm drawing on my own experience here, that as we battle an ongoing and simultaneous mental health and climate crisis, people need avenues to be able to connect on an emotional level with other people in the way that we are doing now. But the rise in calls to local crisis lines, which is what I do, is sort of emblematic of a potential new avenue, and I think symbolizes people's desire to just simply be able to have an emotional connection with another human being. Climate change and the effects that it has can sometimes be critiqued as nebulous, but it's important to feel or put those feelings out and discuss them with other human beings in a way that's anonymous and free. That presents a way that people can deal with and release some of the collective trauma that we're experiencing, to simply have a way to talk to another human being. And I've sort of been able to witness through my work the beauty that can come of two strangers speaking over a phone line that will never meet. I think it begs fundamental questions about what human connection can generate. And I think that we need more of these sorts of ways for the community to be able to connect in a way that doesn't carry a price tag and is accessible to all.
Thank you, Jonas. Thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts. You know, as you're all speaking about this, there is this, we are all energy, which is something I feel that we have forgotten about. You know what, we call this energy mana, that it extends within every single one of us. It is part of nature, as Deb was talking about, right? And also, it's like when we're talking about colonization and decolonization, it is so important to know that decolonization is not something that is only for Black and brown bodies. Decolonization is something that we all have to go through, and we need to be able to heal that part of ourselves, which I feel is the aloha. Part of the decolonization process, which Pokala Inui and Hawaiian activist talks about, is the 5 phases. It is the rediscovery and recovery of our indigenous being, of the reconnection to the earth, right? That's the rediscovery and recovery. Then it's the mourning, the fact that we are still in this place and having these conversations. After the mourning, there's the dreaming, like Megan talked about, right? It's the dreaming. And then it's the commitment to actually fulfill the dreams of what does it look like for a different future for all of us and for the next 7 generations. And then the other part of it, the final part of it, is the action. On what actions are we going to take in order to shift the narratives and rebuild a system where every single person not only survive, but thrive. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a break for about 15 minutes. Kathleen, would you be able to come on and let us know what the next steps are? I think we're taking a break right now. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So in 15 minutes, we'll come back and Jacqueline, Dr. Burrell will usher us back into the fold and set us up for the Q&A. So bring your questions.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in 15 minutes.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And I hope you had a nice break. For the next part of our session today, we will be having a question and answer session with our panelists. So I will be feeding our moderator, Dr. Jerry, some questions, and you can feel free to put them in the chat as they come up, and we will try to get through as many as we can. So I'll let Dr. Jerry take over from here.
Thank you, Dr. Burrell, and thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your break. So we have the first question. And so the question is, individuals talking with a Native friend the other day who said that a perspective is that humans would not have damaged and extracted from the earth if it were not for mental health problems. If this is so, then the whole problem of climate change originates with mental health problems. For the panelists, do you have any thoughts on this? And also any thoughts on mental versus spiritual health terminology? Because to this individual, it feels like connection to nature is spiritual and existential, and is a term mental more reductionist. So there's quite a few, quite a few questions there, but let's see, who would like to start? Dr. Ang, would you like to start?
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Jerry. I also want to make sure that I leave this up to those, the experts on this panel to answer that question. And I will try to see if I can understand the question and answer it clearly. I absolutely believe that mental health and spiritual and also physical, I take a very biopsychosocial and spiritual approach to mental health. And I believe that all those factors, right, contribute to the conflicts and the illnesses that we experience. And I think that as, for our marginalized BIPOC communities, we cannot talk about mental health, as I mentioned, without talking about the root causes, the structural, political root causes and social structures that contribute to those things. I don't see them as separate. I see them as entwined in one another, not one causing the other, right? I also am from the belief that mental health problems is also one in which originates from, I mentioned this generational trauma that lives within all of us, that we carry sometimes on an unconscious level, that contributes to the detriment of our health, not just our mental health, our physical, spiritual, and our social and mental health, right? So I actually see them as entwined in one another, actually, rather than one necessarily being the thing that originates it all. But I do believe that it is something that we cannot ignore, that without some of the systems that have been in place, the structural oppression that you had mentioned, the colonization, I do believe we would not see as mental health issues as we do today in our marginalized BIPOC communities. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Deb, would you like to add to that? Basically, this individual is saying that the whole problem of climate change originates with mental health problems. So any thought on that? And if I'm getting this wrong, I would like to invite, I think it's Claire Richards, to come off of mute to ensure that I'm actually asking the right questions. But Deb, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Claire. Thank you for that. I guess when I think of mental health, I know that often someone asks me something and I can't mentally grasp always what either I want to say or what I understand. I just know from a spiritual perspective, I just kind of lean back and take it out of my mind and put it into a spiritual sense. Like it's almost like asking your body what it is that you need or you want. Man, I never go wrong when I ask my spirit other than my mind. I feel like my mind plays tricks on me, or I second guess whether I should do something, whether it's based on data or information, or, what does this world already tell me about myself? And when I try to take away that construct, those lines, and just lean into, okay, what does my spiritual self want? Man, I feel like I nail it every time. I feel like it answers to who I am as a spiritual person, recognizing that we have those traumas. I completely agree that we have those traumas within our body that we don't even understand. So I try to really, as I'm getting older now, and I try to lean into being okay with myself, that I don't know everything. I mean, I don't. And I don't think anyone else does. The best you can do is find comfort within your own spiritual self, and just lean into understanding your own vibrations, and just being okay with it. If you need to cry, if you need to get fresh air, if you don't feel up to something, honoring yourself will help to honor other people, other things, other connections. And I think that it goes back to simple teachings. You don't always need data is important. And I'm a policy analyst by trade. So I actually went to University of Washington for many years. I was ready to go to law school, and I took a right on the freeway and went to Lummi Nation, and I lived in the woods with my uncle for a while. And I tell you, after 7 years at the University of Washington, I felt mentally, emotionally drained. I knew my spiritual self needed, my true authentic self, my spiritual self needed to be taken care of. And that's where I found my happiness. But I know each person has their own place that they need to go to, but why go anywhere else than inside yourself to find it?
Absolutely. Thank you, Deb. Megan, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would, I don't profess to know either. As I've thought about this and really looked at, sacrifice zones, it just feels so clear to me that it would be impossible for us to have this level of climate change without the structural racism that's behind it. And I think, a lot of that is that there's been this dehumanizing of the other, but we, especially as white people, have forgotten that we lose our humanity in that. And I think for me, a lot of my practices are coming back into my full humanity, and whatever that looks like, holding space, being curious, bringing others in who know more. I think it's really just that myth of separation that we have from ourselves and from our Mother Earth, and we are Earth, we are with her, we're with each other, and just finding those places.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. I like that you talked about how we have this idea that we are separate when we're really not, right? We're really not separated from the earth. I mean, I can feel, and I don't know if anyone else, it's like if you are in an organization that is completely toxic, when you walk outside and take that breath of fresh air, you're like, oh, your shoulders just kind of relaxed. And it's like, tell me that you're not connected to the energy that is outside of that, right? Out of the toxicity that we can be around. Jonas, did you want to add anything?
Well, what I was going to add relates pretty directly to what Megan was just saying. One of the more recent authors that has been very influential for me is Frantz Fanon, who writes a lot about racism and colonialism. And I think that the first aspect of the question, would humans have damaged and distracted the earth were it not for mental health problems? I think that one could understand white domination, colonialism, the extraction of resources, the past that has led us to this current present as being a form of narcissism, a form of obsession with domination that has distorted not only white people's perspective of their own abilities and what they should do, but also made it impossible to fully see other people, the other that Megan was just referring to. And really that these could be regarded as mental health issues, that we do need to delayer all of these different aspects of colonialism that have distorted our ability to understand ourselves and to connect to other people and to connect to the environment.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Jonas. So we have a second question from Dr. Lisa Price. It's a little lengthy, so panelists hang in there with me. So Dr. Lisa says, I have a couple of questions for the panel, and I will preface this by saying that everything is connected and a mechanistic approach is not sufficient. However, understanding pinpoint issues can help. Having said that, with regards to how does climate change specifically impact BIPOC populations? One, what does the data say? What are the specifics? In fact, let's just start with that and then we'll go into deeper. So having said that, with regards to how climate change specifically impacts BIPOC population, what does this data say and what are the specifics? And anyone can start.
I suppose that one thing I would say about this question is just that I don't really know if it's about necessarily the targeted impacts of certain age groups as much as the fact that certain populations exist in areas or have been displaced into areas that are disproportionately affected by climate change. I suppose that one of the examples that I keep thinking of over and over again is the Texas energy crisis that we saw last year with the power grid failing. What we saw after the fact was that disproportionately low income and non-white populations bore the brunt of that, bore the brunt of lacking electricity because only the critical areas such as hospitals were actually funneled electricity. Those areas tended to be white, wealthier populations populations and the populations that were further away from those central areas, which were more likely low income or non-white, starved to death, had no access to resources for weeks on end. And of course, that results in mental health trauma in and of itself. But I suppose that I don't know if the data would be about relating certain age groups and comparing those age groups to different age groups and sussing out that data. Perhaps there is research on that, but that's kind of what came to mind for me reading this question.
Thank you, Jonas. Who wants to answer next or add to it?
I think what came to me in this question is the issue of rape and domestic violence, sexual assault. The reason it came to me is because when I've been learning a lot about when the ships came over in colonization, it was primarily men. And so the behaviors of many of these men, as we read in reports, were of one of taking, of course, taking of lands, raping of women, because there were not women here. And I think that same mentality continues here on the U.S. soil in North America. That same mentality of taking, which means just not only taking from the earth and the lands, but also taken from women and unfortunately children. And so we have a high rate of sexual assault in this country. And I know that from working on domestic violence issues, but also if you're taking from the women, and the women are caretakers, and they have to set the table in our cultural way. When the tide is out, the table is set for us. And so if our women are being abused and aren't able to do that, then we're missing the feeding of our families. There's missing links. There's still that mentality of taking. And I think that's something that we need to address in this country is that mentality. And how do we stop that mentality? How do we stop taking what is not yours or not ours?
Thank you so much for sharing that, Deb. It's talking about the data and everything. And sometimes I feel that with westernized, colonized ways of thinking is that data is something that can be extrapolated from numbers that actually could be laced in bias. But for me, when we look at the data of Indigenous people, nature is our greatest scientist. Right? It's like if we can actually see that and look through that lens. Danielle or Megan, do you want to add to it?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lisa, for that question. In terms of data, when I'm thinking about that, I came across this report by the World Bank that said that the increase in temperature is going to place 100 to 400 million people at risk for hunger and starvation. You combine that with the mental health disparities that we're seeing in our LGBTQIA+ communities, in our Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and our Native and our Indigenous people, okay, who are higher rates, right? That both to develop mental health disorders from climate change, right? But also that there are also barriers to the resources to address those mental health. And you're going to see an explosion in those numbers. That 100 to 400 million, I wonder, the percentage of those people who are going to be in addition experiencing these mental health issues, right? And we have to understand that within mental health disparities, it's also a disparity within the assessment, diagnostics, and treatment that occurs as well. I talk in my classes about misdiagnoses, labeling, stigmatization of mental health, and what those numbers are. And those numbers are appalling. We know that about 50% of whites receive mental health services, with less than 30% of our Black, Hispanic, and Asian populations receiving those mental health services. I am concerned about the services that they will see, how many will receive when we are seeing the climate change impact on them. So that may or may not answer the question, but those are just some things that I just want to throw up that give a realization of how critical these issues are right now today.
Thank you, Danielle. Megan.
Yeah, I think, and I'd be curious if Danielle found different, but when I've been doing research on the impact on young people, there just isn't or aren't studies that specifically identify the specific impacts on BIPOC. And that's, pretty sorely missing. But, I think we definitely have data on air pollution and that right to breathe fresh air. And there's research that shows, exposure in utero and exposure in childhood increases risk for development of mental health disorders by age 18, which is around when we'll usually see that. So I think it goes back to, that right to breathe fresh air.
Thank you, Megan. We have a question from Love. What are the actions that we can take to combat climate doom propaganda that is being pushed to delay or minimize action on climate change? That's a good question.
Could I have an example? I'm not exactly familiar with that language, climate doom propaganda.
Love, would you be able to come off of mute and answer Jonas's question?
Sure. Basically, I've been reading a lot that's talking about ways that, for example, fossil fuel companies have been trying to shift the narrative away from climate denialism to the idea that, oh, now it's too late for us to do anything, so why bother? So again, first it was, this is not really happening, and now, oh, it's happening, but it's too late to worry about it. And so that's sort of to minimize actions that might actually have real positive effects in the short and long term.
You want to take this one first, Jonas?
I suppose, first of all, I just have to say that I haven't thought about this issue in a while, and it is sickening just to hear it said out loud, that would be the shift in the narrative. I think that just needs to be said. But, I think that it will take alternate messaging from governmental leaders to combat it. And frankly, right now, the Biden administration has kind of, unfortunately, been reversing its path from focusing on shifting away from fossil fuels and the kinds of things that we need to be doing to actually reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that it's a tough path forward. It doesn't seem like, in fact, Biden recently directed a lot of oil companies to increase their oil production because of the price of gas right now. It's going to take government leadership to demonstrate that change can actually happen through policy, and also that policy is warranted and good and can make an impact on the current trajectory that we're on.
Thank you, Jonas. Deb, Danielle, Megan, anyone wants to jump in with that?
I will just say, Lev, I agree. I just talked to my son, I think it was 2 weeks ago. He was speaking at a climate rally, and, he was reading off the statistics, and it does feel so doom. And it's like we're going to die, and it just doesn't feel like any hope. But I encouraged my son to make sure that he talks about our teachings and how important it is that we follow those specific teachings of going back to, our gardens, going back to the earth, and reminding people who we are as inhabitants of this planet, that we have to get back to that respect. We have to get back to holding ourselves accountable, while also talking to our friends and neighbors, saying, hey, this is what we can do. A neighborhood garden. We have to really, maybe these are small steps, but they're important ones. They really are important, because with our leadership here, even today, saying these words, it can expand. And these are all seeds. Every time you allow yourself to be your best self and most authentic self, you plant the seeds for tomorrow. And I think that that will help with the climate doom. It's exhausting, it's sad. And we need to talk about what's happening, what we're doing, how we're destroying the earth. But we also need to remind others that here's some ways that we can protect and that we can serve and that we can honor the earth.
Thank you, Deb. Danielle?
Go ahead, Megan, did you want to go?
Go ahead.
Oh, no,
Megan.
you go ahead. You got it.
No, I'd love to hear from you too, Megan. In listening to this panel and this question, a few things came up for me. Is that this idea of why bother, right? If we're already on this course, why bother? My answer to that is that our people are hurting and they're dying. That's why this is important. We are hurting right now, right? And I've always said to my students and those who know the work that I do is that change cannot happen in silence. That our voices are powerful, they are loud, especially those with privilege. And we cannot give up hope, because what message are we sending to our children if we give up, right? Because they will have to bear the brunt of this. And I think we want to be able to show them that you are capable. You are able to elicit change, even if maybe they're not going to see that in their lifetime, but they're going to be at least send out the ripples and to affect those around them as a community. And so for me, the why bother is because right now we have the power and privilege to affect the mental health and well-being and the quality of life of people right now. And as a mental health provider, that is a huge responsibility. And I think is a responsibility that we say that we will take when we become mental health or when we become health providers, right? That we don't only treat, but we are we are advocates for mental health. So I'm not giving up. I hope no one else here gives up. I think change is very possible, and I'd rather make the dents than not do anything at all. So I hope that answers, at least from my point of view, that question. So, yeah.
Thank you, Danielle.
Our voices are important.
Absolutely. Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two versions of this doomerism. Like, one is the fossil fuels and it's strategic, and it's about, really coming against those oppressive forces. And there's folks like Mary Annalise Hagler and Amy Westerveld, I think is her name, or Michael Mann, who really dive deep into that. The other, I think, is, what we talked about here is just the lived experience. Like, it's really easy to move into that space. And I think, it's really that development of courage. Wangari Maathai, I think is her name, who planted, all of the trees and worked with children. Like, that's what she said. That is the work of our time, is to develop that courage in our young people as they move forward. And so I think, whatever those holding spaces are, that we bring that courage. And just following up on, what Danielle said, like Katharine Hayhoe talks about, like every tiny degree of warming matters. And so I think it's that thing of it all matters, we all matter, and we have to bring our courage to the table.
And if I could add, that was very well said, Megan. If I could add to what was just said and what Danielle said, I think that there's also an important distinction in recognizing that response to climate change can also be adaptation of our current infrastructure and making investments in communities to minimize the impacts of climate change. Of course, the strategic pivot to saying that it's too late is not them saying, oh yes, the climate is being damaged and we need to take action. We need to make other investments rather than the ones that you're proposing. It's solely to benefit themselves. And I think it's, as I said earlier, a pretty sickening strategic turn. But there are distinctions in what actions can be taken against climate change, no matter how far along we are, no matter how many degrees of warming have already occurred.
I will also add to this. I could talk about this forever, Dr. J. I'm sorry, but I will also add, thank you, Jonas, because something that you said also brought up to me is this invoking a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness, right, from these big corporations is a form of oppression. If you think about it, right? It's making others feel like you have no control, you have no power over this, just go along with it. It is a form of oppression, truly. And that's why when I say your voices matter, that change can't happen in silence, what I'm saying is that we have to rise up, right? Our allies with their support, right? In fact, I actually put more responsibility on our allies, those who empower, to actually say, no, you no longer have to just listen to these messages, that you actually do have a say and control. And that's what I try to do in my work with the kids who feel a sense of hopelessness. I provide a little of that background of saying, like, you do have power. You do have control. You can make change. And that's to address some of the questions that I see coming up here as well. Because I highlight to them that, this is what oppression looks like. This is what oppression looks like. And you live with that every day. So it's time to break that chain. So anyways, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Danielle. And don't ever apologize. Don't ever apologize. So yes, absolutely. We have a question that came in from Cynthia Werner. She says, I would like to know how parents of tween to young adult age children can help them with their mental health challenges centered around the climate crisis. This is a burden that those of us who are parents causes mental health challenges for us as well. Danielle, you want to jump on that?
I think I need to take a back seat right now. I think I've said too much. Feel free if others want to start and I can piggyback on that.
All right, who wants to jump in for this?
I can get it started and then Danielle can beautifully jump in. I think, first of all, we as parents have to really sit and feel and think through our own experience of this and really process our feelings. There's been research on, what most holds young people in this experience, and it's really leaned into this kind of meaning-focused coping, which is helping them feel through the feelings and move towards ways of taking action that really come from their inner sense of self and what their passions are and what feeds them. And then what we really need to be doing as parents is saying yes to whatever that is that comes up for them and joining them. There are so many beautiful examples of young people being joined by their parents and supported. My friend, Dr. Heather Price, her son was the first to do Friday for Future Strikes here in Seattle. And she manages his, Instagram account. She's there, behind the scenes doing all the things, but he's in the forefront. So that just to get us started.
Thanks, Megan. Danielle?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really great question. And in fact, we have some resources on how to talk to our children, like some books and some pamphlets on how to talk to our children about climate change that's going to be posted in Canvas. So Dr. Lumiere should have that link for you guys to take a look at. But just to piggyback on what Megan said, I think it's important that we are truthful with our children in our conversations. We cannot assume that they do not know what's going on around them. They know they see it with their eyes. We cannot deny them of that knowledge, right? They see it. And they're experiencing that as younger and younger, as they get younger, as they're younger and younger. And we really need to open up that conversation in an age-appropriate manner. Of course, it's not like just dumping all at once, which can then feel like a very doom and gloom, right, for our children to process. But I think it's important that we have an open, honest conversations when our children are starting to notice the impacts that it's having on their own mental health, right? That climate change has on their mental health. I think it is very important for them to connect with others, with nature, to understand the importance of it. I also want to preface in saying, and something that I also learned very recently, is that connection to nature, that experience very much so among our marginalized BIPOC communities. For a very long time, nature for certain Black communities was seen as something that was actually, and purposely so, seen as dangerous, unsafe, not for them. And we must understand that not everyone has the same interpretation of nature. So to say, just go out in nature and be one with nature, we have to understand that's not for everyone. There are different connections that one has with it and the history that one has with it. So I don't like to give blanket solutions, for when I'm working with children. I think it does vary on an individual level, but I think the core of this is that we must acknowledge and we validate those feelings that our children are having, and absolutely be honest and truthful with them. when they come to us and they ask, or we notice those things in our children. So, but please take a look at some of those resources for more details as well. So.
Thanks, Dr. Ong. Deb or Jonas, you want to jump in on this?
I would just add that, to know your rights, know human rights, teach your children about the legal rights and the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights. There's many UN declarations that talk about how we should protect and preserve, and we have a right to fresh water, we have a right to healthy food, and so help our children understand those rights. And it's as simple as Googling and finding out information and talking to your children if you don't already, if you're not connected to the UN rights. But that's something that we're working on right now, is some new protection, some new law through the UN. And also in the federal government, we have, I have a bill out that I just, it was introduced in September. And so helping our kids understand, how they can read. There's so much information right now on the internet. And so the bill that I have out right now is the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies in the US Act. So that's HR 5444 and Senate Bill 2907. So how does all of that connect? That goes back to the truth of human rights, of that our human and our plant life and our animals have a right to breathe fresh air and drink water. I mean, it goes back to the simple teachings that we need to center ourselves around.
Thanks, Deb. Jonas, you have anything to add to this question?
I do not.
Thank you. We do have a question that came in from Sarah Douglas, and she's curious how each of you are using your unique narratives and experiences to collaborate with other leaders within the community. Given that many people in public health, law, and politics are also hoping to collaborate, I'm curious about each of your experiences with connecting with and/or educating other experts to create comprehensive approaches to community care. She's worried that experts are too siloed in the trainings and procedures of their field to know how to collaborate in an effective way that uplifts members of the community that have continuously been dismissed or put on the back burner, and would love your thoughts on how to approach this as we enter into our careers. That's a good one. Who would like to start?
All right, I'm going to give a go. I think all of the spaces that I've entered into, there's been these gracious invitations, and I've said yes to them. And then there's been a whole web of connections that have come out over time. So I've just given myself space to just let things emerge and be curious. And then I've really worked on Talking Climate is one of the major climate actions that I do in my life. So yesterday I did a presentation to my perinatal consult group about the impacts of climate on perinatal mental health. And I just keep reaching out to other healthcare providers, to people in my community who are affected by air pollution. I think for me, it's just this emergence and being gracious with opportunities that present themselves.
Thank you, Megan. Anyone else would like to jump in?
Well, I guess any answer that I would provide here would be admittedly tangential to the issues we're talking about, because I work in the crisis response field, generally speaking. But what I'm seeing is, I don't know how many people are aware of it currently, but in July, there will be a new suicide prevention lifeline launched. It's a 3-digit number called 988. And that is going to launch in every state across the country to sort of centralize the functions into one memorable phone number. And that's engendered a lot of collaboration across different agencies within the government and within nonprofits, and also with the police, as we figure out what is our best use of resources, and how can we get people the care that they need. So I am sort of motivated by the collaboration that I'm seeing in going into this project. And really what it demonstrates for me is that if the right people are asking the right questions and are brought together to address an issue, then better solutions can come about. As I said, I don't really have much to say in terms of collaboration on issues that would affect climate change. But the issues that I'm talking about do affect people's mental health and the access to the resources that they need. And there is a lot of ongoing collaboration to ensure that calls that don't need to go to the police might better be fielded by mental health professionals that have resources that people need. And I'm excited about that collaboration. That's all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Jonas. Anyone else would like to jump in on this?
So I'll just briefly answer that. I will say that, I have been in conversations where it seems that we have very different points of views in terms of what we're prioritizing and the approach. And I find that coming together to have a common goal of wanting to improve the mental health and quality of life of our youth, in the work that I do in our youth, has been one that no one disagrees about, that our youth are our future, and an investment in our youth is a common goal that many people do have. So I find that in collaboration, we try to find that common ground. I will also share that in the work that I've done both in the past and present, I worked in schools with primarily marginalized BIPOC communities, where I found myself being the mediator, the person that was helping between the conversation of the children, the teachers, and the school staff and the people in power and the boards, and actually opening up that dialogue to say, these are the things that are affecting the mental health and the academic integrity of these youth, who are an investment of your school and the future of your school, and how we can address those things in a way that preserves their rights and that sees them as humans and treats them as such. And so I very much start at, like, where do our children spend the most time? Where are they getting these messages? Where are we seeing the greatest impact? And so I invested a lot of my time here starting in those schools for those communities and bridging that gap in that conversation. So I think for everyone kind of needs to have their own place that they feel comfortable and they feel like they can make an impact in, and having the courage to reach out to the communities to address those things. Okay. And yes, Claire, I believe our society absolutely needs to do more of that. They are our future. They are our future. They matter, and they have opinions and voices just like we do, right? So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. So for the sake of time, we have 5 minutes and we have one more question. It's a good one. This is from Melissa Coleman, and she says, I wonder if this type of work should be viewed as essential in addition to the work we do with our clients in therapy. For me, it can feel inauthentic to instill hope while doing little to engage with the issue at large.
I'm not sure to answer that question. Can you?
In fact, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask Melissa Coleman to come off of mute and say a little more about the question that you have. Melissa?
Hi, yeah. So what I was referring to was advocacy work. Essentially in our education as, training to be mental health clinicians, we're taught that advocacy work is absolutely part of the profession, but we're also expected to, have a kind of a heavy caseload and do continued education. And I think that gets put on the back burner a lot of the time. So I'm wondering, in this sort of realm, if in your personal views, from your perspectives, if climate advocacy work should be viewed as essential to kind of the job description of a therapist versus solely working with clients in the therapy room, sort of removed from, I guess, the contexts that we're treating. I hope that clarifies what I meant.
Thank you, Melissa. Panelists?
I do think that one thing that, I'm sorry, Deb, it looked like I may have just cut you off. Do you have something that you want to say? I was just going to say that one thing that I'm deriving from this question is the value of recommending advocacy work and public action as a means of helping people with their mental health issues. Of course, because I work in the nonprofit and volunteerism field, I've seen the impact that becoming involved in helping people can have on the mental health of the people providing the help. It is a transformative experience to become a part of something larger than yourself. And I think that recognizing that we have an ability to influence what people view as a means of self-care, if they feel a sense of doom around climate change, I think it's worthwhile to recognize that taking action or recommending that they take some form of action to join up with the community might be a good means of therapy or self-care.
Thank Jonas.
And
Go ahead, Deb.
I think we're seeing what we're hearing is that we need a systems change, systems wide, from education to therapy to legal systems to, even systems within our homes, within ourselves. These are all, the dream of the planet is out there, and it's already been created prior to us arriving here on planet Earth. So we have to really look at what's already been created and what do we wish to create. So that's where we have to break our silence on those things that just don't mean much to us, it doesn't resonate within ourselves, and to start to be, to create those systems within the spaces that we're in. And for me, it starts also in my home. I was breaking the systems in school districts, and as a leader, breaking the systems in Washington, D.C. a lot as a policy analyst and a leader, so those are systems that people said, no, they cannot be broken. But truly, one person can break those systems. One person can plant seeds. It may not happen at that moment. It may happen a week later, a month later. That's something that my good friend Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, said is like, what do you want to see? And I gave him maybe an inch, and he said, no. What do you truly want to see? He goes, plant those seeds today. And so I walked into a room and we removed the death penalty out of the Democratic National Committee. And it was just me kind of working the room really quick, but then sitting down, just making that decision that, this doesn't do justice for us. And so it's just being that one person that consistently goes against the grain, and you have to be okay with yourself. You have to know that, I'm sorry, I'm talking, but it never doubt that you can make incredible change and plant those seeds. Those seeds are what can grow in the future. So that's what I'd recommend, the systems change. And it really does work.
That is a perfect segue, Deb. And as we go into our breakout rooms, we're going to be talking about resilience, and the resilience not just to bounce back from adversity, but the resilience to have the capacity to shift and change in the moment of this decisions like you were talking about, right? So thank you everyone so much for being here. And I am going to turn it over back to Dr. Burrell.
Sorry, thank you everyone again. And thank you, Dr. Jerry, for moderating. I feel like a sponge. I've just been soaking up so many things you all have said, and it's very enriching to feel and to see where we can put things into action. It's time for another break. So we'll take a 15-minute break, get up, move around, get that blood flowing, get it up to your brain so we can come back and discuss. So enjoy your break.
Aloha, everyone. I will be signing off now. I'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Dr. G.
All right, everyone, I hope you had a lovely break. But let's hop into our next session, which is titled Practicing Resilience, Feel, Talk, Unite, Act. And joining us, we have Andrew Bryant, MPH and licensed social worker. He is a clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and co-director of North Seattle Therapy and Counseling. His clinical practice focuses on the impact of climate change on mental health. Andrew is also the founder of Climate in Mind, a project dedicated to gathering and promoting resources related to climate psychology for clinicians, the media, and the public. As part of this project, he provides lectures, seminars, and study groups on climate mental health, and has been interviewed and featured in a range of media stories on climate psychology, including Time Magazine, Como News, Yale Climate Connections, and metro.co.uk. He is a member and organizer of the Alliance of Climate Therapists Northwest, Act Now, and a member of the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the introduction. Well, I'm still impacted by listening to the panelists, and I just want to express my appreciation and honor for being a small part of this conversation. It was really great to hear from all these people. And my goal here is to be, I can't really follow up on all the great things that were said, and I don't want to. I want to be as brief as possible so that we can get into discussion and you all can start processing what you've heard and seeing what bubbles up together in community. But I want to provide a model that I think can be helpful in thinking through resilience and engaging with these issues. And it's pretty simple. It's just 4 words: feel, talk, unite, act, and repeat. So it's kind of a cycle. And I kind of put this together after I observed with a lot of clients, people I've talked with, and myself, how it's hard to balance falling into the harder parts of our emotions in terms of anxiety and grief, and despair, helplessness around climate issues, loneliness, the importance of feeling those emotions and experiences, but not getting stuck in them on one hand. And then the other kind of extreme is jumping into action, trying to do something, just anything, because I feel so distressed or upset about what I'm hearing, what I'm reading about, what I'm feeling. And so the idea is balance. And I think it goes back to a theme that came up earlier about caretaking. Caretaking ourselves is really important because for one thing, we have to be sustained in this engagement with the climate crisis, and also because we're part of everything that's going on. So taking care of ourselves and our friends, family, community around these issues is part of taking care of the earth. So what I'm going to suggest in the breakout groups is, I'm not too structured, but I'm going to suggest you try to find about 5 minutes or 6 minutes to go through different ways that the themes of talking or feeling, as in feeling the emotions, letting them be there without any without judgment or preference, allowing what's there even if it's contradictory or confusing. That's the first step. Second one is talking about it, finding people to share these feelings with, and that helps many people feel less alone and less isolated. And it could be with a therapist. That's sort of I'm a therapist, so that's the first thing that comes to my mind, but it doesn't have to be. It could be with family and friends, neighbors, colleagues at work, or community groups. The third step is unite, which is once you've felt the feelings, talked about them with other people, looking for groups that you can engage with and share in a communal experience around these feelings. And then the fourth step is act. And the idea is that once we've gone through these first 3 steps, talking or feeling, talking, and uniting, we're in a much better place to identify an action that's in alignment with our skills, our capacities, our resources, and that will be really kind of engaged with our hearts and sustain us rather than burn us out or feel out of, disconnected from who we are. And then, you can repeat the process because you're going to have some feelings about those actions. And there's going to be a, continual process of exploration. So I'd like in your groups to see if you can find time to talk about those 4 ways of engaging with this issue and how we can be balanced and how we can find a sort of trajectory through from the feelings to actions that are in alignment with how we're feeling about the climate crisis. And I hope that's enough structure and not too much structure. And I like to let things unfold as they'll unfold within each group. And I think that's as much introduction as I'll give. And I hope, let me know if you have any questions. And I look forward to hearing what comes up.
Thank you so much. Andrew, can't wait to see what you all come up with. So you're all in breakout rooms. There are 7 different rooms and 7 moderators. So your moderator will guide you through the process of how to make sticky notes and add them, and then your kind of co-creation there at the end. You'll have about 25-30 minutes to go through these steps, and then I'll come back. We'll all come back together. I'll be here in the main room in case anybody has a technical issue. Okay, thanks. And opening the rooms.
We went right down to the wire. Thanks to my group. It was real. It was a great discussion.
That's when you know you're invested. It's like, so let's hear from the groups. I don't know if you know what number you were on the Jamboard. Do you? Like you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7?
Are you talking to me?
Any of the folks in the groups? Yeah, sure, Jonas.
Oh, sure. We were group 6.
Okay, so how about hearing from group 1, and that would have been Ben's group.
And I'm hoping that one of the 3, Andrea, we had a very spirited discussion and a very spirited and emotional discussion. And I was hoping that one of the 3, because if you look on the Jamboard page 2 of 7, that are some of the comments that I gathered, and there I would ask one of the other 3 participants to chime in here.
I would be glad to. Thank you so much, Ben, for taking notes as we talked. I think I can share. Yeah, I felt like there was, can everyone hear me? I'm looking at the Jamboard, not the.
Yes, we can hear you.
Can hear me? Great. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think we did some kind of talking about the depth of grief, the also the kind of energy that comes up as we even try to think about change. We talked about that the ability to change is real. Hope has to do with being able to live and act from our hopes. Yeah, that I hope that conveys a little bit. I know we have a lot of groups, so maybe that's enough.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's hear from group number 2, and that would be Dantes' group, and we'll have, if maybe 30 seconds or a minute.
Okay. Hi, so our group was we kind of talked more on the, I guess, the generational aspect of it. I was the youngest person in my group, and let's see, we were on page 1 of the Jamboard. Some of the comments on there, we were just kind of connected to how all 4 of the topics, they kind of lead into one another. Like, you know, you mutually feel the same way, and then it brings the talk, the discussion, and then we're united through that, and it brings us to, you know, the action at the end, and just trying to figure out those different ways of connecting the different generations and through the different struggles we've all been through, and, you know, the way that we lived our lives. So definitely want to open a little bit of space to anyone else in my group if they want to make any comments on that.
I'll just add, thank you, Dantes. It was great having you as our facilitator. I'm Cynthia Wenner here. And I would say that making space for listening and the talking, you know, feeling and talking is really important to me.
Thank you, Dantes and Cynthia, and your whole group. Moving on to group 3, Courtney Clemenson's group.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I think we had a really great conversation. I think we were identifying a lot of different tensions, a lot of different dualities that we were all simultaneously kind of holding and working through and experiencing together. You know, I think we had conversations around this feeling that like we know a lot of this information in our bodies already, you know, and having these words and these frameworks to put to it is helpful. And, you know, we know a lot of it already. Our bodies know a lot of it already. And so we were kind of working through this duality of feeling hopeless at the total hegemonic kind of feeling that these interlocking systems can kind of have, and the duality of feeling empowered to do something about it through community, through solidarity building, through information and sharing of wisdom and knowledges. You know, so it's just a really beautiful conversation that I think our group had, navigating these multiplicities that we were kind of humoring. But I'll open it up to the group as well to see if anyone has a couple things to add, because we had a lot that we covered.
Thank you, Courtney. And it looks, and those Jamboards, you can look at other people's Jamboards too, and kind of get sparked by them. I know we're running out of time now, so but I can't wait to delve into them myself. All right, Danielle's group, Dr. Ung's group.
Yeah. Just, you know, very quickly, and feel free, anyone from my group, to speak up. I think one of the common themes that I've heard is this, the connectiveness of being able to share this and speak with a group that cares so passionately about this topic was actually quite a hope. It created such a hopeful feeling in a lot of us, and also a relief feeling of being able to share this. So I really enjoyed meeting with my group and getting to know everyone. We all brought something very unique to the conversation. So yeah.
Thank you. And then room number 5, Megan's group.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to jump in, please do. I think really there was just this beautiful connection and flow that was happening in this process. And this kind of idea of hope in the midst of overwhelm really showed up, and that this space to talk about it really brought up feelings of liberation and energy, and then brought people into, you know, what are the circles of trust that they build around them. And then just really broadening and deepening in the work that they're already doing.
Thank you. And then Jonas's group.
Well, I hope that my group will allow me to speak on the group's behalf, at least for just a moment. We spent a lot of time talking about our feelings, and I think that was central to the discussion. We didn't actually put anything in the Unite section of our Jamboard, but that does not mean we were not united around the issues we were talking about. There was a lot of apathy and hopelessness that need to be acknowledged. And one of our group members, Sean, pointed out that BIPOC communities are working within a system that actively works against them, and that particular experience within the system generates its own feelings of apathy and hopelessness and needs to be acknowledged and needs to be put into the communal discussion. But we also walked away with just a feeling of wanting to actually be able to take real action, to take this hopelessness and put it into something real is sort of the next step that we were left with. But we also know that there are very real things, composting programs, recycling programs, and other communal efforts that are already ongoing and provide platforms for people to meet and talk about the environment and talk about how resources should be used. And we thank Sean for talking quite a bit about those things. I don't know if anyone from my group wants to add anything.
Thank you, Jonas's group and Jonas. Moving down to Andrew. Bryant, you want to bring it home?
Sure. Yeah, there was so much that we touched on that it's hard to summarize, but I maybe will highlight one theme that came out as about the Unite step. And there's an interesting tension between how good it feels to come together with other people who have a shared experience, either in terms of background, situation, struggle, feeling, and also how that can be hard then going out into the world outside that group and facing the reality that other people don't feel the same way or don't understand the situation in the same way. So I just thought that was really interesting. And I also just really appreciate how sort of great it is to come together with so many different people, and especially in a randomized Zoom group, you don't know what you're going to get. And it's great, hearing people's perspectives is just so interesting and new. So I really appreciated that. And that's all I'll say. I just, yeah, thank you for it's great to hear everybody talk.
Wow, thank you all so much for being open and sharing and honestly caring about our planet and each other and all of these communities that we're all part of. As we close, I invite everybody to gently close their eyes or bring them to a soft gaze. Feel your feet on the ground, rooted into the earth, wherever they may be. Feel that energy from the earth rise up your legs, into your knees, up your hips, up your back, into your shoulders. Maybe give them a little wiggle. Down the elbows, the hands and the wrists. Move up the front of your body into your neck, the jaw, the tongue, the nose, all the muscles of the cheeks, the eyes, the eyelids. And just take a nice big belly breath into the belly, ribs, chest, and even let out a So it is one thing to listen. It is another to understand. And the third thing is practice. That's one of my favorite quotes by Swami Kripalu. And as we move into the rest of our day, our weekend, week, and future, how can we use this knowledge we've soaked up to drench everything around us, the earth, our communities, our families, our friends, with persistent action? We all have ability. We all have privilege, whether it's race, sexuality, orientation, financially, able-bodied, neurotypical, educated, the list is endless. And it's okay and important to acknowledge it. It empowers you to plant those seeds of knowledge and grow. So what are you going to do with your abilities? Because you all have so much to offer to this world. You all have been so wonderful. Thank you to our amazing panelists, to our organizers, sponsors, and with gratitude, many thank you. before we close, if you're following down in our agenda, there is a very important post-event survey that would be very helpful if you filled out so we can continue to host events like this. So please fill out that survey. And there's also a link to donate to any of the health in the climate crisis educational programs. And we do have a couple of announcements. The 2022 Earth Day, Beacon Hill aircraft pollution. Let's talk about it. Saturday, April 23rd. Oh, that's today, 3 to 4:30 p.m. So later today, and there's a link right there to sign up. May 13th, 20th, and 27th from 9 to 1 Pacific time, Healing the Colonized Mind, the Path to Personal Decolonization. On October 2nd, actually first, October 1st, we have the North Puget Sound Conference on Race. And then we also have Save the Date, Communities of Color Coalition Annual Conference. That must be the same conference. The date is October 1st, is the clarification there. And please watch out for more info on the Health and Climate Crisis Certificate Program coming online in fall 2022. And anyone else have anything to add? Many blessings and thank you to you all.